Hey everyone, it's Sevy. Spinatirozilla president and Fontaine fashionista Navia is finally here to whip out her gunbrella and blast enemies into oblivion with her photogenic moves. Navia has certainly collected quite the fan base among players just from the Archon quest alone, me included. So if you've been anticipating pulling and playing her, this guide is here to help you out. We'll cover how her kit works, gameplay tips, constellations, best artifact and weapon builds, team synergies, and more. Let's begin!
Going somewhere?
Navia is a 5-star Geo DPS that puts Geo back on the attack scaling road, while also giving Crystallize renewed purpose. Her talents are mainly to help set up her Gunbrella's huge nuke damage, and she can accommodate on-field and quick-swap playstyles for different team rotations. Let's see how her talents work together to make her a hard-hitting DPS, starting with her skill. Navia's skill has a press and hold version. Pressing it auto-targets a nearby enemy and instantly fires off her Gunbrella's shard shots in a cone-like trajectory, which hits within medium to close range like a shotgun. Meanwhile, holding her skill enters aiming mode to give you more firing control and simultaneously makes Navia absorb nearby crystal shards, which is relevant to boosting her skill's damage. Navia's Gunbrella also penetrates through enemies in front of her, so with good positioning, you can hit multiple enemies to maximize her AoE damage. Another important mechanic is stacking up shrapnel charges, which are the bullet icons you see beside her. You can stack these charges whenever any party member picks up crystallized shards, up to 6 charges maximum as indicated by the bullet icons, which will then be consumed when firing Navia's Gunbrella. The more shrapnel charges consumed, the more shard shots fired, the bigger the damage. But note that if some shard shots miss the enemy, they won't receive the full damage. You want to have at least 3 shrapnel charges upon firing, as that will also double the base damage dealt. Then for every shrapnel charge consumed past 3, Navia gets a stackable skill damage bonus, so the more the merrier. At max stacks and with other team buffs, this umbrella can hit really hard. Navia's skill has 2 cast charges, each with a 9-second cooldown, so you'll want to accumulate shrapnel stacks before her skill casts to boost their damage output. Each skill hit also creates 3 to 4 geoparticles and can deal Usia aligned damage every 7 seconds. You generally want Navia to catch her own particles to battery herself, and so her ER target won't be too high. With her Ascension 1 passive unlocked, using Navia's skill infuses her normal, charged, and plunging attacks with Geo for 4 seconds, which cannot be overridden, and they also get a 40% damage bonus. This opens the option to give her more field time doing normal attacks, which deals more Geo damage and helps trigger Crystallize in between her skill casts. You can fit her entire Geo-infused 4-hit normal attack combo within that 4 seconds. If you're fast enough, you can do an N4 combo, dash to animation cancel the last hit, then do an N1 attack, which will still have Geo infusion. Another possible combo is N3 dash then N2. Moving on to Navia's Burst, casting it deals initial Geo damage, then periodically rains down Geo bombs to deal Geo damage, lasting for 12 seconds. Additionally, hitting an enemy with her burst can generate a shrapnel charge every 2.4 seconds. Her burst hits don't have high damage scaling, but their main purpose anyway is to help you generate crystallized shards and charge Navia's Gunbrella. It also doesn't seem to have a set field, but rather, it follows Navia to target enemies within her proximity, which is pretty convenient for enemies that tend to move around. So generally speaking, Navia's rotation is basically to open with her burst, then swap to other teammate abilities for your setup and to accumulate crystallized shards. After that, you can swap back to Navia to do her skill. Then, whether she uses up a lot of field time to do her Geo normal attacks can be up to you, or you can swap off her quickly after to let other teammates do their thing. Either way, once you've stacked up more shrapnel, fire her skill again and rinse and repeat. Though Navia only has 2 skill charges, it's possible to fire it a 3rd time as soon as 1 charge is off cooldown. This can help a lot with her energy and of course let her deal damage, but just be aware if it's extending your rotation too much or if buffs and abilities have already expired. As long as you consistently activate her burst, it's a relatively flexible gameplay loop since Navia's field time isn't strict. It'll mainly revolve around collecting those shrapnel stacks to supercharge her skill damage. Then for Navia's A4 passive, she gains a 20% attack buff for every Pyro, Electro, Cryo, or Hydro party member up to 2 times. Navia will generally want non-Geo teammates to help her generate crystals, so maxing this passive will come very naturally. When leveling Navia's talents, prioritize her skills since it comprises at least half of her total damage output. If you plan on using her normal attacks a lot as an on-fielder, prioritize that over her burst. But for a more quick swap playstyle, you can prioritize her burst over her normal attacks. Navia's kit already feels complete and cohesive at C0, but let's see what her Constellation's at. With C1, when Navia casts her skill, every shrapnel charge she consumes restores 3 energy and reduces the cooldown of her burst by 1 second, up to 9 energy and a 3-second cooldown reduction per skill. This is a quality of life constellation if Navia's ER requirements are high in the team, and even if it isn't that high, you can at least cast her burst sooner if it times well with your rotation. However, this constellation is more of a stepping stone to her C2, which has a bigger impact. C2 mainly does 2 things. First, each shrapnel charge consumed will increase her skill crit rate by 12% to a maximum of 36%, which allows you to skew your build more towards crit damage and offers a significant damage bump. Just be mindful if you're using her with a crit rate weapon and Marechaussee Hunter on a Furina team, as that might cause you to overcap on crit rate. Second, it adds a shot of Navia's burst when her skill hits an opponent, which mainly helps provide a shrapnel charge for your next skill. If you have the primos and really want to invest in Navia, C2 is a good early stopping point and offers a higher increase versus her signature weapon. C3 increases her skill level by 3, a decent bump for her main damage source. C4 decreases the Geo resistance of opponents hit by her burst by 20%, which can also benefit other Geo party members. C5 increases her burst level by 3, and finally, C6 gives Navia's skill a 45% crit damage bonus for each shrapnel charge consumed past the first 3, and it also refunds those charges. As expected, this is a huge damage boosting constellation that turns her Gunbrella into a bazooka, while making it easier to continuously max out. C2 and C6 will be Navia's main target constellations if you're willing to worship her with primos, but just know that her damage is already quite good at C0. Now let's discuss how to build Navia, starting with her artifact stats. For her main stats, you want an attack stance, a Geo Goblet, and a crit circlet that will help you get a good crit ratio. If you're stacking a lot of damage bonuses, using an attack goblet is a possibility, but check an optimizer or do your own artifact comparison for a better evaluation. For her substats, you're looking for enough ER to hit the needed ER target to burst every rotation, then crit and attack to boost her damage. Her ER targets can vary depending on her team's particle generation and how many of her skills you can fire per rotation, but here are some general ranges. As for her artifact sets, the 4-piece Nighttime Whispers in the Echoing Woods is the new Geo Focus set. It gives 18% attack and 20% Geo damage bonus after using a skill. Furthermore, it gives an additional 30% Geo damage bonus if the user has a Crystallize shield active for a total of 50% Geo damage bonus. However, be careful in scenarios where enemies might easily break the shield since those aren't very durable. This is Navia's general best in slot build outside of a Furina team, which isn't surprising given its co-release with her. However, it may not be resin efficient to farm if you don't want the healer set it's paired with. Don't feel pressured to sink your resin there, as there are still other good set options. If playing her with Furina, the 4-piece Marechaussee Hunter's high crit buff can be triggered consistently, and it can marginally overtake Nighttime Whispers. Another competitive set is 4-piece Golden Troop, which greatly buffs skill damage. Note though that she'll lose part of the 4-piece effect after 2 seconds of being on field, so you at least want to use her skill as soon as you swap to her. For more flexible builds, you can go for 2-piece combos of an attack set, Archaic Petra for Geo damage bonus, or Golden Troop for skill damage bonus. This lets you focus more on getting better stat quality to bridge the gap between her 4-piece sets. As Anish mentioned, the 4-piece Archaic Petra set can be situationally beneficial by using it to buff 2 to 3 characters of the same element, such as a Yelan Xingqiu pair for example. Whether that damage increase compensates Navia's personal damage loss can depend, so you can use an optimizer or run personal tests to compare. Moving on to her weapons, we have a lot of good choices ranging from free-to-play to 5-star options. For her free-to-play choices, there are 3 potential recommendations. First is the Ultimate Overlord's Mega Magic Sword, which is the free 4.3 event weapon. It has an ER main stat, which has good value in teams where Navia's ER needs are relatively higher, and its passive buffs her attack. However, you will need to do the Melazine helping quest to get the maximum attack bonus. The craftable Tidal Shadow is also an okay free-to-play option that is generally close to the Mega Magic Sword's potential, but requires billets to refine. It also needs healing to get the full attack buff, so only use this with a healer teammate that can reliably activate it. One more purchasable free-to-play option is the Blackcliff Slasher. It's a decent stat stick, but has noticeably lower potential against single-target boss fights since you won't get to activate its passive. I also wouldn't recommend buying it if you haven't yet, especially when the previous options can be more consistent. Moving on to the 4 stars, the Serpent Spine is very highly recommended, and if you're choosing between the BP Claymore claymores, this has generally higher potential than the talking stick. At high refinements, it's also very competitive even versus 5-star options. However, keep in mind that you lose the passive stacks from taking damage, so having a shielder ally can help ensure the stacks stay up. Navia naturally creates Crystallize shields too, which aren't as strong as dedicated shields, but they can still offer a bit of protection to help prevent damage. The talking stick is still viable though. Its passive buffs activate when an element is applied to the character, and if you're playing her with Bennett, who self-applies pyro on the active character, that already guarantees one buff. Otherwise, relying on enemies, specific allies, or the environment to apply an element on Navia might be more difficult or inconsistent. The Sacrificial Greatsword is another ER weapon option if Navia is in an energy-hungry situation, and its skill cooldown reset mechanic also lets you potentially add one skill cast per rotation, so ideally it should be R3 to R5 to more consistently proc during each rotation. And for the 5 stars, Verdict is her signature weapon with a high base attack, crit rate substat, and a passive that gives both attack and skill damage bonuses. More importantly, it's a pretty badass looking axe that infinitely buffs her style. In terms of damage, an R5 Serpent Spine at max potential is pretty close, so if you have that and can effectively utilize it, you can save your primos, unless you really just want the aesthetic. You can also prioritize her C2 over this since it gives a greater damage increase. Beacon and Redhorn are generally great big attack and crit stat sticks, while the Wolf's Gravestone and Unforged give a ton of attack percent, which is still good particularly when there are no attack buffing teammates, so their value diminishes especially when comped with Bennett. The Skyward Pride shouldn't be dismissed as well. It's got a high base attack, the ER main stat is very beneficial in high ER requirement teams, and Navia's playstyle can still incorporate normal attacks to trigger its vacuum blade attacks. Next, let's take a look at Navia's team synergies. To start, Navia's field time can vary whether you're incorporating her Geo-infused normal attacks more in an on-field playstyle or using her in a more quick swap-like scenario. As an on-fielder, Navia can have around 10 seconds of sustained on-field time if you fully take advantage of her Geo-infusion, but you don't want to stay on her if she's no longer infused, and in that case, it's generally more beneficial to swap between teammates to battery the party, activate abilities, or restart the rotation. In a quick swap-like playstyle, Navia will generally swap in to do her skill, then do maybe 1 or 2 normal attacks to trigger Crystallize, and wait to catch her particles before swapping out. This can allow some teammates to insert their field time in between her skill casts, which you can use for their abilities, to battery teammates, trigger Favonius weapons, and so on. You also want teammates that can provide consistent elemental application of Pyro, Hydro, Electro, or Cryo in order to continuously trigger Crystallize on enemies and consistently charge Navia's skill. Keep these considerations in mind when choosing Navia's teammates, but here are some general team templates and samples to start with. First is a double Geo team where the other 2 slots are flex slots for non-Geo characters. Having a Geo teammate enables Geo Resonance, which buffs shield strength, increases the damage a shielded character deals, and reduces enemies' Geo resistance, which are all very beneficial buffs for Navia. Some can also be a Geo battery to help with Navia's energy needs. They may also enable more Crystallize shard generation, but Crystallize has a 1-second ICD per enemy, so whether or not you actually get more crystals can depend on various scenarios. There are several choices for Geo characters here, depending if you're looking for damage or support utilities. Zhongli will be a prominent teammate for her to provide a lot of comfort, and since his shield can shred all elemental resistance including Geo, which is one of the rare sources of Geo resistance reduction, his thick protection will be particularly helpful if playing Navia with Serpent Spine to better guarantee the weapon stacks are preserved. His pillar may not be a consistently reliable source of energy particles though if enemies can destroy it quickly or if they move around a lot. Noelle is also a great option. Her Geo infusion doesn't disappear when swapped out, so she can accommodate a quick swap friendly rotation with Navia. She can serve as your team's healer, shielder, and driver, and since her Geo normal attacks have a big AoE, she's very effective in generating crystallized shards against enemy mobs. If she's also paired with Farina, which is what I personally do with her, then she can counteract Farina's team-wide HP drain. Ningguang, Geo Traveler, and Albedo are also viable Geo units that can contribute damage, particle generation, and their own respective buffs. For the flex slots, you'll want a mix of buffers, healers, or quick swap friendly DPS units depending on what your team wants. While Bennett will be a generally great support for consolidating healing and his huge attack buff, Navia can still do quite well without him, especially if you have other sources of attack or damage bonus buffs like Farina's fanfare stacks. Off-field and quick swap friendly DPS units can be another source of damage output, and they can provide constant elemental application to set up crystallize reactions. You can make your 2 flex slots the same element to help with their energy needs as well, well, like having Bennett to battery Xiangling, or Yelan and either Xingqiu or Furina to reduce each other's ER needs. You can also opt to just have Navia as the solo Geo of the team. The principles for team selection are the same, where you're looking for more damage sources, buffs, and/or defensive teammates, generally among Pyro, Hydro, Cryo, or Electro units. The main thing to consider here are Navia's energy needs. Apart from these, Navia doesn't have a lot of particular team templates, especially considering she doesn't synergize with Denjo or Anemo units as well as another element would. Perhaps we'll discover better synergies for her or get new characters to comp her with, but her current teams at least already perform quite well. To wrap up, I just want to summarize my initial thoughts on Navia. Navia's kit is a departure from the defense scaling mono-Geo stereotype that dominated the Geo meta since Ito and Goro came out 2 years ago. By contrast, she actually needs other elements on the team to help trigger Crystallize reactions, and though she doesn't buff the Crystallize reaction itself, she at least gives it a new purpose by using it as a way to buff her damage. This is, in my opinion, a well-executed concept to make a Geo unit more interesting and have more cross-element synergy, which is very welcome considering Geo has access to literally only one reaction, and until now there's barely been any incentive to actually take advantage of that reaction. Power-wise, since she doesn't have access to amplifying or additive reactions, her damage will really just rely on her own multipliers, stats, and teammate buffs. Despite that, her damage output is quite good without being overpowered, and those big numbers from her Gunbrella feel very satisfying. It's also a huge pro that her field time can be quite flexible, as that can open the door to more team variations and synergy with future quick swap friendly units. So overall, I think her design is refreshing for older players to see, yet simple and flexible enough for newer players to enjoy, with satisfying numbers and animations for everyone to have fun with. I mean, a shotgun, cannons, Mary Poppins? She truly has it all. And that's it for this guide. Let me know what you think of Spina di Rosula's princess down in the comments, whether from pulling her or doing her trial. If this video helped you out, don't forget to leave a like, consider subscribing to my channel if you haven't already, and I will see you all soon. Take care!
Now, take my hands in yours and give them a good shake. See? Doesn't that feel good?